Hey guys, Shiftcore here with another classic WoW video for you. In preparation of the Burning Crusade, we still don't know if and how Blizzard is going to implement Burning Crusade. So a lot of us are just stocking up on gold right now on the off chance that we get to take these classic characters on the journey with us into TBC. So today I wanted to talk about stockades boosting. Now, when I do a stockades boost as a paladin, this is probably the most efficient boost that paladins can do. It can create a lot of gold. I charge about 3 gold per person per run, so we're looking at 15 gold for the full set. It only takes me about 30 minutes at this point to complete all 5 of the dungeon runs. So we're talking about 60 raw gold in 30 minutes worth of work. So I'm able to charge this much money because I pull the entire dungeon in a single pull, and it's non-stop, so there's no downtime. So the things that I wanted to really discuss in this video is I want to talk about the gear choices you make, consumables you may or may not use, and something that I don't see a lot of on the internet, I want to talk about macros. I also want to briefly discuss enchants and different ideas of why certain things are the way they are. So when we start talking about gear, you'll see that in this set of gear that I'm wearing right now, I built this set and I call it my Flame Wrath set. So Flame Wrath is a 2-handed weapon that has a chance on hit to give you a fire shield. The fire shield will do 10 damage to any target that hits you as a Thorns effect. The difference is that this item scales at a 1-to-1 ratio with your spell damage. So you see right now I have 240 spell damage, which means every single time a mob hits me, they're going to take 250 damage. This can stack up to a crazy amount of damage all at once. When we talk about enchants, I put a weapon chain on the Flame Wrath because there are mobs in here that disarm, and I don't necessarily mind getting disarmed if I'm using a one-hander and a shield, but if I'm using a two-hander, I really don't want that thing to get disarmed. We are going to be using Seal of Righteousness for this pull because every proc of Seal of Righteousness gives an additional chance on hit for the Flame Wrath to proc, so you're going to see a lot of weaving in and out of different seals as we go over this. Traditionally, we have Demon Forge Breastplate. Again, this scales with 40% of your spell damage. It's a great way to heal yourself up. The biggest non-combo that you have in this set is the Uther's Strength Trinket. So it gives you a bubble, and unfortunately, while the bubble holds, the Thorns effects won't work. And that tends to be a decent payoff because the sheer volume of how much damage it absorbs, and there aren't a whole lot of options where you get the Flame Wrath proc and you have the Uther's Strength up at the same time. It will happen occasionally, but it still ends up being pretty good. Force of Will is really great. Now, I raid as a full protection paladin. I'm full tank spec. That means, in this case, that I have Blessing of Sanctuary, which is very powerful for doing boost runs. If you do not have Blessing of Sanctuary, Force of Will kind of doubles down and acts as like a secondary Blessing of Sanctuary. So in this set, I'm going to be very defensive, and it's going to be fine though, because I'm going to be able to just kind of all in on damage in this case. There are several different sets of gear that you can run for this. A lot of people can run Nomergon in a tankier set. You'll notice I have way less spell damage in this set, but my defensive stats go significantly higher because I swap out for a lot of tank pieces. So we're going to stick to the Flame Wrath build for now. Now you'll see that when I do eventually switch to a sword and a shield, I'll switch to the typical Skull Flame, but I also use Hakari Manslayer. This is yet another item, just like the Demon Forge Breastplate and the shield itself, that has a 100% spell power conversion. So all of my spell damage funnels into that Drain Life effect. So when I need to go Sword and Shield to be defensive, it's a very fast way to heal up. You'll also notice that I have the weapon enchant for Fiery Blaze. Now this is an alliance-only enchant, but it has a 15% chance on hit to hit all targets in the area for a small amount of fire damage. It's like 9 to 13 fire damage. Over the course of these runs, though, you're pulling almost 100 mobs all at the same time. This weapon enchant can very easily do 2,000-3,000 damage over the course of the dungeon run, whereas the alternative weapon enchants, be it Crusader or Fiery, they're not going to put up anywhere near the numbers. You're looking at maybe 600 total damage versus 2,000. You'll also see that I do choose to use a Nagler ring. It ends up doing around 6,000-ish damage over the course of the entire dungeon, which is a pretty solid amount for a single item of investment that otherwise gives me a couple of defensive stats. But that's pretty much the gearing. As far as consumables go, I do have the PvP combat potions, both mana and health. I may or may not pop them. You do not need to, but since they're so cheap and it's very easy to hit the rank to get them, it's not a bad thing to keep on you just in case. The real thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into this is I want to talk about macros, because I don't see a lot of people talking about them. So, you'll notice right here that I have a pretty strange macro. I know you might not be able to see it on the screen quite as easily, but we're going to use the equip command, and the conditional is going to be that if we have a two-handed weapon equipped, so ideally in this case, if Flame Wrath is equipped, it's going to put on our one-hander and our shield. And then the next line of text is going to have the same equip command, but it's going to say, basically, if we have the shield on, it's going to try to put the Flame Wrath back on. This is a very convenient way to have a single button to do all of your weapon swaps. I have a secondary macro here. I use this more in Nomergon boosting than I do in Stockades, but it would switch between my other two shields, which are Ardent Defender and Force Reactive Disc, if I'm trying to go for extra tankiness while still having a solid damage amount. The important thing to know here is that this is a one-button macro that lets you easily swap between whatever weapons that it is that you need to swap to. Now, once we start doing the pull, you're going to notice that I have a couple of weak auras that will track when I have the Flame Wrath buff. Because the nice thing about Flame Wrath is that you don't have to have the weapon equipped once the thing procs. So you can swap back to Skullflame Shield, and then Skullflame Shield can have its Flame Strike damage stacking on top of it. So we can get some really big numbers happening really quickly. So we're going to take a look. We're going to hit the weapon. You'll notice that I have the Convict marked as a skull, the first one. I don't generally use a macro to do this, but a very efficient way to do it if you have a hard time targeting things in big groups of mobs is to have a macro to target convicts. These are the guys that stun you, and these are the things that can be the difference between being able to successfully one-pull the dungeon and not being able to successfully one-pull the dungeon. So as we get started, I'm going to make sure I have Sanctuary on. I'm going to make sure I have Red Aura. I'm always going to go in with Seal of Righteousness, and I'm going to target down the convicts as quickly as I can. You can see already the Demon Forge Breastplate immediately procced. Now, the nice thing about the beginning of the dungeon is that very rarely do I ever worry myself with actually like putting my back to the mobs or doing any of that. I just kind of go in. Because I don't mind letting them hit me in the back, at least early in the dungeon. So as we go, there are times where I will dispel myself of the poison. I try to be mindful of how much mana I have. I do try to strafe. The other big thing is don't be afraid to backpedal. This is one of those situations where S-keying is not the end of the world. I am going to always do whatever I can to focus down bosses. And that's just because some of the bosses, like Decker, will reset if you're not fast on what you're doing. So there's our Flame Wrath proc, and you'll notice it procced twice. And as soon as it procced, I immediately put my Flame Wrath away and put the Sword and Shield on. And now at this point, I'm just walking through, and you can see the sheer amount of damage that this Flame Wrath can do in a single proc. So we're starting to get a little low here, so for argument's sake, I will put on a Seal of Light. Mostly because, as I'm explaining this in the video, I'm not necessarily paying super attention to what I'm doing. I'm trying not to use Holy Shield, because this is something that you can do with any of the spec options, so I'm trying not to use any of my prot-specific abilities. I'm always making sure I see that there is a convict that's in this path. There's a pat that will come all the way from the other side of the dungeon. This is usually the safe side to go down first. We did get a convict here, so I am trying to focus him down before I put Flame Wrath back on. And that's just because you really just don't want to get stunned while you have Flame Wrath active. So he's running away now, so I will switch back to Flame Wrath, switch back to Seal of Righteousness, and you see it procs so quickly. Especially when you get more and more mobs, just the fact of the parry haste, it ends up being very, very powerful. So Decker can spawn in any of these 3 locations, and when he does, it's not necessarily super important how you pull him or the order you pull him in. I am going to pull him last, but that's more because of the pathing that I try to do. A lot of the times the mobs will run away in fear, and as they're running away in fear, I'll just kind of allow that to happen, and they'll pull things to me. You'll see that the Fiery Blaze procs, and it has that big fire explosion attack. So we've got our weapon back. We're going to go back to Seal of Righteousness. And once I've got the boss, I'm just going to backpedal. He gets low, hit him with a Judgment. And this is just so he doesn't reset. So you'll see that as you're doing this run, we're still doing the run in a single pull, but because of the sheer amount of damage that this build is putting out, things are just naturally dying as you're running through. And we do have moments here where not all the mobs are here, so we're not really getting parry hasted. So we're going to go back to the Sword and Shield. I try to stick to the Sword and Shield if I'm under 50%. But once you're in the final section of the dungeon, we're going to always make sure that we're targeting down a convict. We're going to pull way more convicts than what we can quickly kill. You will notice that that was only a rank 1 consecrate. Sometimes I use it as a pulling tool. For mana efficiency, I haven't been super worried about how much I'm using it for now. So, you know, I'm at full mana, so like using a consecrate as a pulling tool is not the end of the world here. Here's our next convict. I'm going to re-sanctuary myself. Usually, when I start this, I'll use a Greater Blessing, but right now you see we're super good on mana, and this is something where we're talking about using as few resources as possible. Symbols in this case will count. This boss can be a huge pain in the butt because he also has a stun, so I try to focus him down as well. You'll see I'm going to start to use Consecrate more often now because of all of the stuns. I'm trying to basically foreshadow where these stuns are going to happen, and then make sure that I have a Consecrate down so that I'm doing some kind of amount of damage while I'm doing it. So you'll see that I haven't bubbled, I haven't been stressed at all. I'm just kind of going through casually. You know, we're having a good old time while we're doing this. A lot of this is just a matter of having safe strats. We're going to hit this convict now. This is where it starts to get a little messy. I'm not actually sure if I killed the boss or not, but we had a full health convict. Ah, there he is. See, he ran away. I'm really not worried once a mob starts to run away. We have so many different sources of Thorns damage that by the time they run away, they're going to come back. They're going to eventually break themselves. It's funny, because when I'm streaming this, I'll always say, break yourselves upon my body. I do one of those silly macros anytime Flame Wrath procs, which is another way to know if you're not using weak auras. You can do that instead. You can have some silly macro that when you get your proc. Once I gather everything, I come into this corner and swip my camera around. This is so that things can't hit me from the back. I'm now using max rank consecrates. And you'll see that, you know, we've used no consumables here. I'm using this very heavy spell damage based build, and we haven't even been using Flame Wrath for quite a bit of the dungeon at this point. And you'll notice that if I take a look at damage, Flame Wrath is still a huge amount of damage. It's comparable to the actual shield itself. And I get aggressive here. And kill our last two. And that is the run. So you can see that it's very easy to pull this entire dungeon, and there's so little that you need to stress about. And that's a single pull. That's me talking to you guys the entire way through. And the thing that really made the difference for me was that macro. The ability to quickly swap between my weapons with a single button push is super convenient. And you'll notice that it does work with my other macros. So if I was doing a Nomer boost, I could very easily swap to my Force Reactive Disc, swap back to my Ardent Defender, and I could always just go back to Skullflame that way too. But that's pretty much it for the video, guys. I hope that this helps, and try to get as much gold as you can. Let's see if we can get those epic flying mounts for TBC before the game even launches. Alright, guys. Take care. See you next time.